Hello guys, my name is Rizky from acreativealt, and I'm probably pretty late in this particular discussion. We all heard about the news. Olympus is basically quitting the camera business, and the fact that Olympus is still around, they only sold the camera divisions, means that probably we won't be able to see any more Olympus branded camera in the future. I do believe one of the downfall probably for Olympus is the fact that they couldn't compete with Fuji, because I do think that they actually try to capture the same market whereby they design the camera as a vintage style camera, which it really makes sense, the fact that they have the classic Olympus pen film camera that was a standard back in the day. They directly compete with Fuji, but in this case I'm not sure whether it's just marketing, but Fuji seems to be the winner. And I look back and I remember one of the first camera that brought me into trying out mirrorless is actually the Olympus EP3. And yes, I actually started photography pretty late. I only started learning photography 5 years ago, although the fact that I've been in the creative industry for 14 years now. And back then I was actually using Canon. I think the camera that I was using back then was a Canon 6D, and I was starting out my side hustle in doing photography and events video production. I do remember that Olympus EP3 was the first mirrorless camera that I think was decent enough and was starting to consider moving to mirrorless camera. And I did write a blog about it in my website in the past. And after the EP3, I think the next camera that I bought was the EM5, and I had a really good impressions about that particular camera, and I think for a long time that was my favorite street photography and travel camera. I remember that I learned a lot about camera works with that particular camera, whereby I was still working as a lecturer back then. After my office hour, I actually walked home and take street photography at the same time. So I'm learning basic things about camera, which is the ISO, shutter speed, and of course aperture with that particular camera. I decided to look through some of our local forums to try to get an affordable Olympus EM5, and yes, I was pretty lucky that I managed to find this particular camera. I purchased this Olympus EM5 at $150, 150 Singapore dollars, which is about $100, 100 US dollars. Of course, the condition is actually pretty bad, and all the details on the dials has pretty much disappeared. So I have to guess what all these are, but I don't think that's a big problem for me. My studio is actually pretty near to my house. Always walk back home nowadays. I'm going to use this camera and try out what I used to do in the past, whereby taking a lot of street photography with this particular camera and see what is my impressions of this camera in 2020. Through the specs of this particular camera, I was very impressed, and the fact this camera was actually launched in the 2012 2013, very impressive. The fact that this camera has a in-body stabilization, the high-speed autofocus, it's something that I was truly impressed. We used to use Micro Four Thirds for a lot of our video productions projects in the past. The fact that my former lead photographers actually prefer a Panasonic camera, which is he was using a Panasonic ES5, so I opened up my own camera bag in our storeroom and found out that we have a lot of Micro Four Thirds lenses and accessories. Back then we were using Panasonic for video and Nikon for camera, so this adapter is really handy, whereby we were actually using Nikon lenses mounted on a Micro Four Thirds kind of adapter. If I remember correctly, this was actually my favorite pancake lens, which is a 14mm prime lens, which is actually translated to full frame types of a situation to become 28mm. So this is definitely an ideal setup for street photography, at least to my opinion. So with that, I'm going to try this out and see if this camera is still a good camera to purchase in 2020. Of course, I will put some of the photos that I take at the end of the video, and of course my verdict on the camera at the end of the video as well. I've been working from home, so I left my studio pretty early, so I'm going to walk home and basically see if there's any nice street photography subject that I can use. And of course with this I'm going to use the Olympus EM5 that I recently purchased and see whether it's still good enough for 2020. The dial tags are already all come off, so I have to basically try and guess. But of course I think once I know what the dials are for, then it's pretty easy for me to adjust. And of course I always shoot on manual function. I need to go for a bit of a shopping trip with my wife, and I'm going to bring the camera and of course try to attempt landscape photography. Hopefully I can take more pictures. So my quick verdict on the camera is that if you are someone who actually thinking of learning photography and you have a limited budget, I think you should consider a second-hand Olympus cameras, especially the older generation. And I was very impressed with the fact that they have a lot of high-end features in it. It has an in-body stabilization, it has a weather-sealed body, and so far the autofocus function actually doesn't disappoint me. I will be very comfortable to bring this camera for any kind of a trip. I think this is an excellent travel camera. The fact that it's pretty light. I also tried to take some photos indoor inside a mall. The raw fast is really robust. If you have any good experience with the Olympus camera, I hope you can actually share your experience at the comment below. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.